So hello, Leslie. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So you're all the way in Hartford, I believe, in your office now.
I am. Yes.
So I am sitting in Atlanta, Georgia right now at the CCSSO conference on assessment. A little surreal to be talking about assessment in the middle of everything else we're talking about these days, policy-wise.
Let me tell you, I just finished one of 4 cabinet retreats this summer, and we were actually forecasting ahead, and assessment was part of our conversation. Whether we want to have a conversation about assessment or not, it is part of, right, the complexity that we have to sort through.
It is, and it was interesting. Just in the crowd in the last session I was sitting in, there was everything from lots of knowledge and hopefulness around where we should go with assessment, but there was also, it's kind of side chatter that I can hear when I'm sitting in the audience around the things we're tired of and the over testing and just the fact that teachers feel tired. And those are all things that as a superintendent, I'm sure you're trying to balance every day.
Those are tensions that we live with and try to manage and really support. At the end of the day, right, it comes to supporting and creating the conditions for, if we can't do away with summative assessments, because we know that there are other implications, and it's not our call to make fully yet. So at least what else can we manage from what we can control? Right. So then what do our interim assessments look like? What is the opportunity for mastery-based opportunities in between until we get to the place that we reimagine the teaching and the learning experience?
Absolutely. So said as a typical superintendent, well said. So tell me, how long have you been in Hartford, Connecticut as superintendent?
5.5 years.
That's incredible. That is hard to believe. Where does the time go?
It just flies, and then you have COVID, and then a pandemic happens, and then you realize, 27 months in a pandemic. So half of my superintendency, right, has been, leading and managing through, right, the unexpected.
So you've been an incredible leader for Hartford. I mean, Hartford is this really special place. If folks don't know Connecticut, there's the little that they know, and they don't, I would imagine they really can't imagine what Hartford is like, because it is so unique, even within the context of the state of Connecticut. And as a person who lived in Connecticut, I know Hartford, I know the surrounding areas of Hartford. I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about what makes Hartford so unique, but also so incredibly special.
Yes, it is unique. When I think about it from a district perspective, so the backdrop is we're a district of choice. And so we are part of a regional school choice effort. Yes, and it has historically, right, tried to address the need to integrate our schools and ultimately, right, get at equity. And it is something that I feel like I'm a loner in terms of the context in which I have to lead. There is no other superintendent or school district with the same context as Hartford. And so, right, we have 39 schools, half of those are magnet schools. And so we welcome students from 85 different towns. And so think about the opportunity that brings for us, while at the same time trying to ensure that we are maintaining the integrity of our mission and our commitment to equity, and ensuring that while we want to draw in the diversity to our schools from our surrounding towns, that we don't do so at the expense of, right, our community schools that are in our neighborhoods. And so how do we honor all of that? And then at the same time, we have to think about the fact that we're a capital city. And so anything and everything that happens, one gets maximized, gets magnified. And, it gives me an opportunity to also maximize on the fact that, there are levers that I can pull when, it's time to amplify voice or a challenge or an inequity that is at play. So a variety of opportunities that we have. And then we have the beauty of just who we are as a city. So we happen to be a gateway. We are a city of that welcomes new arrivals. It has for decades. It's how I came here from Puerto Rico directly to, Hartford. And so it happens to be part of, the larger diaspora in terms of welcoming people from all over, especially, we have deep ties to the island in Puerto Rico.
So I'd love to talk further about kind of your coming to Hartford and your own family transition there. But I'd like to first not forget to go a little deeper into this topic of choice, because Hartford is not a district of choice, because it always has been. It's a district of choice by design, and it took a lot of thought leadership to get to where it is now. And some of it was pressures from outside, some of it was pressures internally, and some of it was design matters by a variety of leaders. So how did Hartford become a district of choice? Because it's fascinating design.
It is. And you're right that, there are multiple lenses that are continuously applied in terms of, so first, we had probably now over about 30 years ago, right, where we had a landmark case that really called the segregation, right, the segregated experiences that were happening for our students, and the fact that the plaintiffs, a group of parents, really strongly led around making sure that the resources and the experiences that students were having, for example, in our suburban neighborhoods, were also being afforded to the students in the city in Hartford. And so, it led to, students being bussed out, for example, to the suburbs, and doing some, design choice within the city, and, iterations of that agreement between, the state, the plaintiffs, and the city, has resulted in the birth of, the beautiful opportunities around magnet schools, and communities really having an opportunity to lift voice and be the drivers of school design. Beautiful schools, beautiful themes that are still at play. And here is, I believe that we're now in the 5th iteration of the agreement. And we are making sure that while we, first and foremost, stay grounded in the opportunity for students to have, right, that integrated experience, high quality integrated experience. And if because of design, it doesn't allow 100% of our students to have access, then we still have a responsibility to ensure that we, get at those opportunities in our neighborhood schools. And so there have been many before me that actually were, those are the shoulders of the giants that quite frankly, I stand on, and want to make sure that we continue to extend on those strong foundations that were actually set, that actually were, started, think about it, by parents and student voice, which is ultimately at the center of what we're here to cultivate.
And I think that's an important point, because the public schools, right, they belong to and in community. And even through part of the iterations of the Chef versus O'Neill case, NCLB came about, and this whole perspective of shutting down low performing schools. And what does that mean, juxtaposed against this case that, Hartford and the state were in the middle of trying to figure out, how do you redesign a district, not just in what's offered, but the whole mindset of the value and worth of the people in that community. And the parents were the ones that brought about that case. One of the things I remember is Elizabeth Sheff and the parents, right, that were part of that conversation. I think one of the things I'd love for you to talk about is how you as a superintendent would advise other superintendents who haven't dealt with kind of the breadth and depth of what you have led through. because it's difficult when the pressure is coming from within. You agree with the parents, but you're not necessarily with them. You're on the other side. So the state's pressuring you, the district, the city is pressuring you. There are other advocates pressuring you, and then the parents are expecting something from you. You know, how do you work through that and still honor first and foremost what parents and kids want and need?
That is, I mean, you in a nutshell named the constant tension that I have, and that I don't know that I will ever be able to fully reconcile, honestly, right? Because those continue to be needs that, right, the multiple stakeholders have. And so first it has to start with maintaining our integrity to just what I call proximity. And it's staying connected and really continuously creating structures for those feedback loops that are so important, and quite frankly became so important. I saw the importance of it when, you know, I was tasked with right sizing our district. And I didn't want to make this about, to your point, schools are failing. Because we know that oftentimes there has historically, whether it's in Hartford or in any other urban or rural area, you know, that has been disinvested in, right? Those are conditions that impact, right, student outcomes. And so having to right size our district and close 20% of our schools as a first year superintendent was so challenging. But the thing that I stayed true to was making sure that I was transparent and that I was a co-designer, and oftentimes fell back, if you will, and let our families, our students, and our community facilitate oftentimes those conversations. And inform the thinking so that then I could make recommendations to the board, because at the end of the day, right, I still don't, it's, you know, that's policy. Board is responsible for, you know, closing a school. And so, you know, I appreciate how you're framing it around, you know, all these stakeholders, but to me, the ones that remained and were at the forefront at all times, especially during that most painful time, were our parents and our students. Now, did that mean that, you know, I didn't face, you know, a challenge and that I didn't have pushback from parents? And absolutely. I mean, no one, you know, school closures are in historically marginalized communities. Schools are a staple, right? They are part of the fabric of a community. So making sure that we continue to have those relationships that, you know, it goes beyond here's what we're doing. For us, it was here's what the research says, here's what our data are saying, tell us what you think, and then, you know, how do we co-create and design together? Oh, and then when we did that, we had to think about, well, what was the resource? Where's the resource equity? And what's the budget? What's the budget development process? What does that need to look like, sound, and feel differently now that we have this new vision for schooling? And then going to the other stakeholders, going to the state and going to the plaintiffs and saying, so here is what the voices in our community are saying they need and they want to be true for their child, for the youth in school. But again, at the center, making sure that it's our students and our families.
You know, what's so interesting is when you're coming into a district like a Hartford public schools, and you're coming in with that passion and commitment to community and to kids and to what's most important, that access for our young people and that equity of access. You come in with that that passion and that mindset. But once you come into the system, while you're received with open arms and the community was excited about your arrival, you then become part of the system. And so in so many ways, I think, our novice superintendents coming into systems now, first they have the complexity of COVID and what's still lingering from that. But then it's also that understanding that you develop as an experienced superintendent of what it means that no matter how passionate you are, you're now part of the system. So, you do become, you're seen a little differently after a while by parents and students as part of the system and not necessarily as on their side, even if you are. And so what's your advice to novice superintendents coming in, kind of going in eyes wide open about what it means, especially if they're going to lead a place like Hartford, a place that has great promise, great potential, great progress, but still has a lot of work to do?
Yeah, I would say, it's building those relationships early on, really slow down and spend time getting to know the community and really listen and hear and listen. And oftentimes, well, what I found is that many of the families that I encountered felt that at some point or another, whether it was during their own schooling experience or as a parent, that they just didn't feel heard. And so, spending time to cultivate and at the same time message the fact that there will be times in which, decisions will be made, and transparently and humbly saying, and these are conversations that I had, like, I will not get it right at all times. And there might be, and acknowledging that there might be no grace that is afforded, or that there might be grace afforded. But, to the extent that they can have those honest conversations, I think we underestimate how that is perceived. While I'm also very aware that, there are gender dynamics at play. And as female, for example, now I have to apply that lens as a female superintendent, you have to also balance how vulnerable, right, or how transparent you can be, because I know that could be a double-edged sword as well. So I would say the one takeaway, if I had one, is, really get close and get to know the community, get to know the parents, get to know the students, and then by extension, right, the staff and the partners. But if there's an investment that can be made early on, it is definitely with parents and students.
So I know you bring a lot of history with Hartford even before you became superintendent. So I'd love to have you share a little bit about kind of your upbringing and your earliest connection with Hartford, and why Hartford means something so personal to you.
Yeah, and I don't want to gloss over the fact that I know that, if I were in another district, I don't know that I would feel the way I feel. Because Hartford truly is extremely personal for me. And so I came here from Puerto Rico at the age of 9. It was my mother, my brother, and I, my mother looking for a safer and a brighter future, quite frankly, for us. And, we landed in the smack center of Park Street, which Park Street happens to be, and at that point in the 80s was, a Latino community. And it was in Hartford that I first met my teacher, who was happened to be a Puerto Rican woman, who I looked at her and I said, I'm going to be like her when I grow up. I'm going to be an educator. She's the one that exposed me to my first visit to a university in 5th grade. And, from then on, it was my mother accessing community-based supports. When she had 2 jobs and, needed to learn English, at the local community center. And so I have a deep appreciation and respect for, the power of community-based supports and organizations. And, I would be remiss if I also didn't share that there were times in which, I did not face the high expectations that I should have, right? There were times in which, though I was surrounded by well-intentioned and loving adults, there were also times in which I was fully disengaged as a student. And the only thing that kept me coming to school at the high school was my after school job. I worked at a local pharmacy, and my mother said, if you want to work, then you have to continue to go to school. And so all of those things, quite frankly, play out for me in terms of the deep level of commitment that I have. I knew someday I wanted to give back. Hartford became my second home after leaving Puerto Rico. And so I think a lot has been given to me. I'm a child of poverty. And so when I measure what I'm able to provide for my own family now, and what my mother and my family couldn't for me. My grandfather was an illiterate man, a second grade education, right? My father, an 8th grade education. So when I reflect on all of that, the least I can do is give back to this community that has given me so much.
I appreciate you sharing that story. I think the stories that our leaders, especially our women leaders of color, have to share just shows so much about the things that we experience that lead to our mindset that we bring to education, and the real student focused mindset that we bring. And it shows in the way in which you engage student voice and how important the voices of students are, because one of the things I'm so impressed by with you is you have your experience in Hartford, but you also recognize and have spoken to, I've heard you speak to this before in other settings, that the students now have their experience in Hartford. The Hartford you grew up in is not the exact Hartford that's there now, and so it isn't as if you're saying this happened to me or this is how I experience Hartford, and I'm assuming that's what continues. You allow for that authentic student voice. And I think there's a lot you can share about that.
Absolutely. I think that, when we designed reimagine our district, it was students that said to us, we want more pathways. We want more career pathways. We want to make sure that there is authentic opportunity for us we want to be part of the budget development process. It was our students in my superintendent's student advisory council that said, we need to prioritize more counselors. We need to prioritize more supports for our multilingual learners, and to give students a voice, not only to just share what they think, but to actually be part of solution and inform policy. Is so valuable and really powerful, because ultimately what we want to do is when our students leave us, we want them to be the best informed consumers, right, of information and of the rights that they have and how to go about impacting change in their world. And what better space to allow them to learn and to grapple with some complex issues while they're with us in school, and create the opportunities for them to do that.
Talk about complex issues. I think kids are, whether they're seeing it in their feed on their phones or hearing adults talking about it in different ways. There's so many policy issues right now that are quite controversial nationally. Roe v. Wade is one of those where I think as adults, we talk about what the implications are for that legislation that is changing, and whether that will stay, whether that will change across states, or what will happen. And we don't often as adults remember to ask kids what they're hearing, what they're thinking, what they would like, right? And so first, let me ask you, how do you manage these kind of big federal policy issues that are impacting our states, and ultimately all of these issues come through our schools? How do you manage that?
So, one of the things that I have done and continue to do is first acknowledge that I cannot not understand what's happening, that I cannot not create opportunities to engage in the discourse. We see that whether we want to or not, it does trickle in, right? Not only are students wondering what this is about, our staff, right, are showing up with their beliefs, their belief system, their biases, their own curiosity and discomfort potentially around these topics. And so I'd rather create opportunities to engage in the dialogue. And so when I think about, and by the way, I'm a parent. I'm a parent of a 20-year-old and a 15-year-old. And when my son, my 15-year-old came home, a few days ago and say, so what's all of this about Roe v. Wade and what exactly is the issue? And so talk about unpacking, right? Conversation around fundamental rights to choose. We're talking about civil rights. Oh, rights to privacy. Oh, there are major gender dynamics at play here. And yeah, creating opportunities for, not opportunities, but just a culture in which in Hartford Public Schools, we not only talk about, but we have to try to solve and work through really complex issues that sometimes are not solvable immediately and sometimes feel very, very, very uncomfortable. And so as leaders, I believe it is our responsibility that we have to model the practice that we want to see in our adults and ultimately in our students. And so shying away from certain conversations, these conversations is unacceptable. I am not saying that you have to, come out and say, well, here is where I stand personally. But we are systems in which, democracy has to and must be discussed. And even at times, opportunities for our students to challenge what that is, how that is evolving right in front of our eyes.
Well, I'm hopeful that our students are going to take us to a better place. And I feel that we as adults seem to be taking ourselves these days. And we hear kids tell us that, say that, as a generation of leaders coming through, you're not necessarily doing a great job, as we can see, with kind of this tension nationally where everyone is kind of doing their their soliloquies as opposed to talking to each other and having a conversation as you're talking about. And that makes it challenging for a school leader, tremendously challenging. I know you have this platform, this other platform as well, to be part of some of these national conversations, because you're on the ALAS board, the Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents. Can you share a little bit about that work and why that's important to you?
Yeah, I will tell you, ALAS, years ago when I learned about ALAS, first of all, I think I even I stumbled upon ALAS and I thought, oh my, first of all, there are more. There are others that I aspire to be like, and there are others like me, and I don't have that local network. And so that was so important to me to feel that I had colleagues across the country that had similar experiences, one as a student, and then also, right, that had an opportunity to impact policy, local and national policy. And so that's why ALAS to me, has such a deep, an important place in my heart, because I can not only have thought partnership, but we are actually, able to inform policy that, really looks at how do we, whether it is from a resource allocation perspective, whether it's policy, whether it's systems level work that we have to do to try to get at our students that are at times in many of our districts, our most marginalized students, Latino students and/or students of color.
Yes, and I always love to see superintendents serving on other national boards because it brings that voice, right? And superintendents have, the complexity of the school superintendent, I think, is unmatched in any other field in terms of the scope of work that you do in a day, and bringing that executive thought leadership to some of these national boards. I think it's important work. And so I thank you for that service, because I do think that's important to not only lead in your community, but bring that leadership to the state and national context.
And it provides an opportunity for me as a learner, right? I take a learner stance often, right? I lead, but I learn. And, having an opportunity to sit along colleagues that, either lead in much larger districts or, a district that has 2 schools, for example, nonetheless, we're able to, across those challenges, identify ways that we can support one another and push one another as well.
So I'd love to end with maybe you talking about what you think was the most important kind of lever that kind of projected you into the superintendency. You know, when you think about those moments in your life that really were precursors to ending up where you are. And I'm not talking about the education pathway necessarily, but the kind of mindset you need to lead as a school superintendent, and to feel that you are leading to you know, with all heart and passion and focus on kids. What were some of those important points in your life that you can point to now as you look in retrospect that was so critical to where you are now?
So there are key markers. One really encompasses just female leaders, having female leaders that I identified with, and or said to me at one point or another, have you thought about management? Have you thought about leadership? You have this thing that you do really well, and it could serve you in this way. Because oftentimes we don't know what that looks like, right? And we also need that voice to point these things out for us. The other piece that is key for me was early on, I happened to be halfway through my undergraduate. I was on my way to become a teacher, and was working full time and going to school full time because I've worked since the age of 14 to help my family. And I had run out of money and my financial aid wasn't enough. And I made the decision to take a year off, knowing that potentially I was never going to come back to school. And a professor said to me, well, that's not the only way. There are other ways to get there. And so I shifted my major. I got access to financial aid somehow and became a social work major. Again, that to me was the big lesson in we have to be flexible and adaptable. And when I reflect, I have been doing that as a child when we migrated to this country, right? When we, had to come to a new way of life and a new culture and a new language. And we've been doing that all along. And so those key moments that really have shaped how I approach, right, leadership and some significant challenges that I know in this context that I'm leading in now, and many of my colleagues in districts that have been traditionally underserved need to show up in ways that, we have to be so resolute in what we believe, and that there is not one linear way of solving, these very complex issues. So those are two examples. The people having role models that have pointed things out to me in terms of my capacity that I might not have identified on my own. And then, being able to realize the power of being adaptable and non-linear.
Well, those are really powerful statements, because so often, when we're not careful, we project to kids today that whether it's a language adjustment that they're making, an acquisition of kind of a new culture, new way of understanding how to be engaged, how to hang on to the value of who they are and their story. Sometimes adults can project that as a deficit, and it's an incredible asset, an incredible readiness for a world of leadership that's out there for them in a variety of fields. And so you're sharing that story is quite powerful and something that kids need to hear, but also other women and leaders of color need to hear as well, because of those mixed messages that we often get as we grow up in our communities. So Dr. Torres, I am incredibly proud of you as a colleague, as a friend. I thank you for sitting with me to share a part of your story, and really encourage you to continue to share your powerful testimony and story, because it can change lives. Other people need to hear that as well. And there's so many for us to kind of extend our hand back to and pull them along and help them to attain these seats because they have so much to offer. And our kids need great leaders. So I thank you for being one of those great leaders in this nation. So thank you.
And I thank you for the opportunity to, and the platform that you are creating for others as well around policy and voice, and knowing that, you know, at one point or another, right, we have to continue to reach and pull. And I see you doing that as well. So I'm super thankful as well.
Thank you.